And the one thing I've heard this a lot as an Indigenous journalist, but I want to say, because I'm not sure other people are as familiar with this, but what we're both talking about, the representation that we saw while growing up. I don't know if a lot of you guys have heard of this, but Duncan McHugh, he talks about the 4 Ds and the W. So to be an Indian on the news, you have to be drunk, drumming, dancing, or dead, or a warrior. And if you start looking at the news, you realize how correct that is. And I think that a lot of young Indigenous journalists and filmmakers are changing that. I do think, you know, we're on the cover of Vogue as fashion designers. You know, it is getting different, but that was really impactful for me when I learned that, and then I started really looking and seeing it places.
Yeah.
And I had all these questions written out for Jennifer, but she's just like this. She runs her own show. And before we were chatting a little bit before we started, and you were kind of talking about just, I want to give you some space to talk about this. We were talking about just why is it important that we're having this conversation? And you were talking a little bit about that.
What did I say?
I know, I'm trying to. It was really good.
Just kidding. Well, I think that these conversations to audiences, you know, who are taking time out of your days to come to the conversation that may not be familiar, or maybe something that is culturally distant in some way, I think it's important because we are here to build a bridge. And those in the spaces that we occupy as storytellers, we're constantly building bridges. That's like one of our hats that we have to wear. And the more we're able to talk to other people about it and have an audience that listens to, you know, these experiences, the better chance we have on being in a space and someone says, oh, well, I know that you're doing this because you have to, so I'm going to help you by helping these people understand not to speak to you that way, or to maybe listen when you speak, or to, you know, start to break down some of the barriers that we commonly face in spaces. Because almost all the time, I don't know about you, I mean, I'm pretty sure I do know about you, but it's always just one of us. Yeah. Because for so long, you know, you're there to just represent that voice, and that had to happen that way because there was just nothing before that. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to just be the only one. So the more we speak to communities and groups and other, you know, people in our society, the more the better chance we have on having support when we're in those spaces and feel really alone. You know, especially in the film industry, where, you know, why I started the Shine Network was because Indigenous women are the least represented in the entirety of the film screen sector. Not just represented on screen, but in the, you know, on every level. And it's so bothersome. It's like, it's so important to have these conversations. It promotes more conversations and more bridge building and more awareness around how lonely it is to be us in a room by ourselves with a group of predominantly non-Indigenous people, you know, trying to live up to expectations that are beyond our abilities because we're just one person, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think.
What about you?
I was going to say, it's interesting because I feel like that's actually one of the reasons why I said yes to doing this talk, is because I was like, I want to meet Jennifer. And because it's really isolating being an Indigenous person in journalism or in filmmaking or in these different. And, you know, I think it's really great that they're creating these positions now, you know, for Indigenous journalists, but you're like, you know, so I graduated and, you know, I felt like I was really young to be put into this position. Like, you are the Indigenous reporter for this entire organization, and, you know, everyone in this organization is going to ask you questions. You're going to be you don't just do your job. Like, I didn't just write. I was like reading scripts for shows, and do you know how to pronounce the name of this community in BC? And I'm like, no, I'm Mohawk. Like, I can't even like pronounce like Anishinaabe-Moan. Like, there's too many vowels going on in there, like, you know? And so, yeah, like I was saying to Jennifer before, like, it took me a long time to even realize how I should be treated and what I needed to ask for, because there was no one to tell me that. And so until I started finding some of these mentors through different programs and through, you know, different things like, well, now I got to get involved with the Shine Network, of course. But, you know, that was when I started realizing, like, oh, you know, you can ask for things like when we were doing the podcast, for instance, we were working with a producer at TVO for a long time. And then I was like, you know, I really think this would be better if we had an Indigenous producer. I just really think that this would go better. And it was, you know, it was a bit of a struggle. Like, they had never done an Indigenous podcast before. They didn't quite realize that it might be a little bit different. And so with a lot of advocating, we were able to hire an Indigenous producer. And so we worked with Ozzy Michelin, and it was like night and day. It was so amazing. And I remember when he came in, and one of the first things he said to me in the meeting was that we had these scripts written and they were maybe like a little stiff. And he said, okay, I just want you to go in here and like put your fingerprints all over everything, like get them in there. And I was like, oh, I'm a journalist. I'm not allowed to do that. Like, I'm supposed to, you know, be separate from the story, and always told, like, you know, don't get so attached to your subjects, and, you know, these kinds of things, don't provide care for them. And like, I don't know how you do that with the kinds of stories they were telling. And so